Hey, this is Dr. Simon Whitaker, your relationship and sexual integrity coach. And of course, we're talking about communication. And in this segment, what we're talking about is pretend listening. So we have 4 levels of communication that we're talking about. Today, we're talking about pretend listening. In a future segment, we'll be talking about listening, then active listening, and the highest level of communication, which is empathic listening. So pretend listening. What is pretend listening? Essentially, when a couple is together, we'll call them Eddie and Mary, and we'll say that after work, they're both at home, and Mary's talking about her day, and Eddie's saying, yeah, or he's not saying anything as she talks. It could be that his mind is someplace else. Maybe he's watching television, maybe he's distracted, maybe he's checking social media, but he's just not listening. Now, for somebody who's a good communicator, or who really values communication, in this example with Eddie and Mary, let's say Mary really values the communication because, like a lot of people who are good communicators, and particularly women, the level of communication is a gauge with regard to the level of health of the relationship. So if the relationship is really healthy, there's good communication because people who are good communicators, that's the primary tool they use. And when the other person isn't communicating well, then they could feel frustrated because they recognize the importance of communication in the relationship. So let's say that Eddie is he's a person who pretends to listen. He's a pretend listener. For Mary, it could be really frustrating because she wants more meaningful conversation and dialogue. But for Eddie, he, like a lot of guys, he may be very satisfied. Now, why would he be satisfied in a relationship in which there isn't a whole lot of deep communication? Well, one may be, maybe that's what he's used to. There could be several reasons. Another reason may be that he hasn't developed some of the skills that would make it easier for him. Because really focusing and really paying attention to another person can be emotionally taxing. If it's not something that you're used to, it can be emotionally taxing to really pay attention. Can you imagine being in a lecture hall, on a campus, or at work, and you really have to focus on something, and you really have to pay attention, and this may even be something that you don't necessarily care about, but you have to pay attention. And for some people, it's not so much that they don't care about the person, but maybe they don't care about the topic. And when that's the case, it can be emotionally tiring for them to do that. But if you care about the relationship, it's worth the investment. So we're here to share some tools so you can do that. So if you happen to be like Mary and you'd like to have more communication or more meaningful communication, what can you do? Well, here's one thing. One of the things Mary can do is try to identify some things that Eddie is really passionate about, some things that he does talk about, some things that he cares about. So when you're with your spouse, think about some things that they really talk a lot about. So watch their eyes, watch the pitch in their voice. What kind of things do they get excited about? And when they are excited about those things, do they talk on and on and on about those things? And that's important information for 2 reasons. First of all, it allows you to know that they do talk about some things and they do get excited about those topics. Now, here's a key point. Don't get frustrated when you notice that. Because you could get frustrated and say, why doesn't he pay attention to me like that? Why won't he talk to me like that when we're talking about housework or bills or something of that nature? So don't get frustrated about that. The key there is to recognize that he has the capability. And same thing is true of the guys. So guys, if you happen to be more talkative and your significant other, if you're dating your girlfriend or fiance, if she doesn't talk much but you happen to talk more, then identify some things that she gets really excited about, some things that she wants to talk on and on and on about. Identify what those things are because it shows you that she has the capability to really engage in a conversation. And then you can use that information later on to help build the relationship. Here's another thing you can try. everybody has some topics that they don't care a whole lot about. So if you happen to be the good communicator in your relationship, and when your spouse brings up a particular topic that you may not be that crazy about, if you go into the pretend listening mode, just be aware of that. Just be aware of that, and if you happen to do that, see what their expression is. So for example, if I'm at home and my wife is talking about some sale at some store, for example, and if I go into the pretend listening mode, then it's really cool if I can at that time say, I just learned about this on that video. Okay, pretend listening. Let me be aware of how my wife is responding. So then I'd look at her facial expressions. I'd also notice how her dialogue goes. Does she notice that I'm really not paying attention, that I'm really not plugged in? If she has noticed, how has she responded? Has she continued to talk? Is she just as excited about this topic, or has her excitement decreased because she notices that I'm really not paying attention now? Because if she responds that way, then I probably respond the same way when she gets into that pretend listening mode. In other words, none of us are perfect. But with regard to pretend listening, it's really important to get out of that mode because you can tremendously enhance your relationship. Over the next week or so, try this. Try to engage in a discussion in which your partner goes into that pretend listening mode. And when they do, just observe, what are the circumstances around that? Do you think they went into that pretend listening mode because of the topic? Do you think maybe the topic was one they didn't like? Do you think maybe that your spouse was just tired? It's been a really long day, and having to put forth the energy to pay attention to this topic is just too much right now? Or is there something deeper going on? Is there something deeper in the relationship going on? And of course, the other exercise is to identify some topics that your partner really does care about. So your partner who is the pretend listener, who doesn't really pay attention the way you'd like, identify some key topics that they do enjoy talking about. And when that happens, try to see if you can engage them in that conversation. So ladies, if your husband happens to be talking to some friend of his about a football game and he gets really excited about that, then try to engage him in that conversation later on when the two of you are together. So if he's the one that often goes into pretend listening mode, then try to talk to him about football later on. But keep in mind, you have to do it on an authentic level. What does that mean? What that means is that you have to talk about it in a way in which you can do it from a point of sincerity. So if you don't follow football, if you don't know a lot about football, you can't ask in-depth questions about a particular player or a particular play, for example. But what you could do is you could ask a general question. If you happen to be aware of two teams, then you could ask your husband, I've heard of these two teams. I've become aware of them. This one team is from the hometown where I grew up, and they're a professional football team, and in that area they're really well known. But we live in this city now, and what do you think are the chances of my team from my hometown, winning this huge upcoming game? And then he can talk about that and see how his response is. Now that's something you could do from a very authentic place, because that's a team you might be aware of because you grew up there. There's a team here that plays, it's a professional team, and there's an upcoming game, or there's some game they've played in the past, and you can talk about that. And that's something you can do from a place of authenticity. It allows you to know a little bit more about his world, because in order to ask the question, you might have to get on the internet and find the name of that team where you grew up, because maybe you don't remember the name now. So try those things. Hey, this is Dr. Simon Whitaker, your relationship and sexual integrity coach, and today we've been talking about pretend listening. I'll see you next time. And if you have questions, leave some comments. So feel free to leave the comments or send me an email. Take care.